Whether a deductive argument is valid or not has nothing to do with the truth of the conclusion. It has more to do with the relationship between the premises and the conclusion in that argument. So a deductive argument can be valid even if its conclusion is false. Consider this valid deductive argument. The premises are that if somebody cheated, then they should fail, and that Sam cheated, so the conclusion, he should fail, or she should fail, or they should fail. What if Sam didn't cheat? This argument is an argument where the conclusion would be true if the premises were true, and that's the definition of valid. So we have a valid argument whether or not the conclusion is true. Remember that deductive valid arguments don't depend on the truth. They aim at the truth. They want to be sound, meaning they want to have true premises that necessarily lead to a true conclusion. But if the conclusion is not true, that doesn't mess with its validity. A deductive argument will be valid so long as it has a valid form. The ideal deductive argument is both valid and sound. Valid means that the conclusion is true so long as the premises are true, and sound means that the premises are true and the conclusion is true. And this is one of those things that you put your drink inside of so that your liquid can stay colder for longer. But let's pretend that this were a cookie cutter instead. It's circular. So whatever you put this on will leave a circular impression. You take that cookie cutter and you put it on dough, on flour that's been rolled, on mortar or concrete, on marshmallow or gum. You'll get a circle no matter what you do because you use that form, that circular form of the cookie cutter. The material you're using doesn't matter. Analogously, logical deductive arguments have forms. And whatever content you put in, whatever information, whatever you're arguing about, so long as you appropriately use the valid argument form, you will always get a valid argument. Modus ponens. It's Latin for the mode of putting. And it looks like this. This is a logical form of a valid deductive argument. The first premise says if P, then Q. That's a conditional statement. The P is an antecedent, which is the hypothetical that if you were to have, leads you necessarily to the consequent, which in this case is Q. Premise 2 is P, so we're getting the second premise as putting what we need to get the conclusion. And then the conclusion is the consequent, is Q. So P and Q are just variables that represent any statement. Remember, a statement is a sentence that can be true or false. So let P represent anything you want and let Q represent anything you want. So long as you use the same information for P throughout the entire argument and you use the same information for Q entire argument as well, then you will have a logical argument with a valid conclusion no matter what your P is and no matter what your Q is. This is about to be really weird, okay? I am going to give you an argument which is deducing the conclusion that there was a Persian president in the United States before the year 2020. And it's a valid argument. Let's have some fun. Let P represent the idea that Obama is Persian. Let Q represent the idea that there was a U.S. president who was Persian. This is the content we're going to use to fill modus ponens. And when you do, if you do correctly, you will get this argument. The conclusion of this argument is that it is true that there was a Persian president in the United States. This is a valid argument because the conclusion would be true if the premises were true. It's not sound, but we don't care about soundness right now. A valid argument form is the cookie cutter that you can plug in any content or material into that cookie cutter and it will give you a cookie-shaped thing. For us, what was it? It was a circle. So if I put this over any material that's malleable, changeable, then we would end up with little tiny circles. Actually, not little tiny. Exactly this size and shape. Analogously, you can put any information you want into modus ponens, and so long as you keep that information consistent throughout your argument, you will have a valid argument. Recall that I made an analogy between a cookie cutter and valid argument forms. Cookie cutters come in different shapes. Like around Valentine's Day, they'll sell a bunch of heart-shaped ones, and then you can make heart-shaped cookies pretty easily. Around other holidays, you might have a menorah or a Christmas tree. Well, valid argument forms also come in different forms. We talked about modus ponens. Here is the valid argument form we've been discussing. Just like modus ponens, a disjunctive syllogism is another valid argument form, meaning if you plug any consistent information into A and B, you will have a necessarily true conclusion so long as your premises are true. Let's take this form and have an example where A is going to be representing the idea that you finished your degree, and B will represent the idea that you did not finish your degree. So we pin A and B against each other by saying that premise 1, either A or B. In other words, either you finished your degree or you did not. Then we add the premise that not A. In other words, it's not true that you finished your degree. Well, if it's either A or B and it's not A, then it has to be B. In other words, you did not finish your degree. Notice that the first premise in a disjunctive syllogism is asking you to carve up the world as if it's black or white and never gray and not any other color. In other words, A or B, not either, not both. Sometimes you can't actually think that way because the world can't be cut up that way. In this example that we've discussed, you can cut it up that way. It's true that either A or B. It's not possible for you to both finish your degree, A, and not finish your degree, B. It's not true that you could neither finish your degree A or not finish your degree B. You either finished or you didn't, not both, not either. So that's fine as content to plug in to the disjunctive syllogism. However, imagine we had this other scenario where A was that you're with us and B is the idea that you're the enemy. Now somebody might offer you that kind of example. You're either with us or you're the enemy. Oh, it's not true that you're with us? Then you're the enemy. With a disjunctive syllogism, you have to be careful that what you're saying is actually a dichotomy. As with this one, it either is A or B. That's good reasoning. It's fallacious reasoning, a fallacy, a false dichotomy to say that either you're with us or you're the enemy. What about the other options? What if I'm indifferent? I don't want to join the group, but I'm not trying to tear the group apart either. Well, then it's not A or B. It's A or B or C or D or E or F. And if that's the case, then you've set yourself up for failure. A piece of the good news is that so long as you use a valid argument form, at least you know your argument is valid. The only way to prove the conclusion of this argument false is to show that one or both of the premises are false. And even then, it'll be a valid argument that's not sound. Modus ponens and disjunctive syllogism are two out of the many argument forms which are valid. If you use any valid argument form, then the conclusion is necessarily true so long as all of the premises in the argument are true.